Welcome to Imran Star Video, or as we call it, ISVi, the collaborative lens on Vancouver, unfiltered, unscripted, and powered by community. We're not just a voice behind the mic, we're a collective of creators, thinkers, storytellers, and city lovers coming together to spotlight the people, places, and energy that make Vancouver what it is. From coast mountain skylines to neon-lit backstreets, we're covering everything from downtown buzz to the untold stories shaping our scene. You'll find us exclusively on YouTube. No algorithms, no filters, just real talk. For behind the scenes, updates, and chaotic brilliance in real time, follow us on TikTok and Instagram. So hit subscribe, drop a comment, and help us grow from 100 to 10,000 subscribers and beyond, because this isn't just our platform, it's yours too. Turn it up, get into it, let's talk Vancouver. This is ISVi. Vancouver is a city that seems to reinvent itself every decade. Once known primarily as a port and industrial hub, it has become a global hotspot for real estate, urban design, and international migration. Sleek condo towers pierce the skyline, craft coffee shops populate formerly quiet corners, and new developments promise walkability, vibrancy, and economic growth. But beneath this image of modern transformation lies a more complicated and contentious reality. A city in flux where revitalization for some often means displacement for others. Nowhere is this tension more evident than in the ongoing debate around gentrification, defined as the process by which neighborhoods experience rising property values, new investment, and changing demographics, usually resulting in the displacement of lower income residents. Gentrification is neither new nor unique to Vancouver. However, in a city already known for its unaffordable housing market and growing wealth divide, the impacts of gentrification have become particularly visible and volatile. Communities like Mount Pleasant, Strathcona, Chinatown, and the downtown east side have become flashpoints in this debate. Once home to working class families, immigrants, artists, and indigenous residents, many of these neighborhoods are now seeing an influx of high-end real estate, boutique amenities, and rising rents. For some, this signals progress, economic growth, safer streets, and new opportunities. For others, it represents loss of culture, affordability, community, and identity. The question at the heart of it all is deceptively simple. Is gentrification a boon or a bane for Vancouver? The answer, however, is far more complex and depends on who you ask, and who has the power to shape the city's future. This exploration will look beyond buzzwords and dig into the lived realities of gentrification in Vancouver. It will examine its economic drivers, its social consequences, and the policies that have enabled or failed to address its rise. More importantly, it will ask what kind of city Vancouver wants to become, one that grows at all costs, or one that values equity, memory, and belonging. Because in a city as dynamic and divided as Vancouver, gentrification is not just an urban trend, it is a mirror of reflecting the choices we make about who belongs and who is left behind. If Vancouver had a relationship status with gentrification, it will probably be, it's complicated. What began as a city rooted in logging camps, railroads, and working class communities has evolved, or depending on who you ask, mutated into one of the most expensive and aggressively redeveloped urban landscapes in North America. And while urban planners call it revitalization, many longtime residents would argue it feels more like an eviction wrapped in reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. Gentrification in Vancouver didn't arrive overnight. It crept in like a yoga mat left behind at a community center. Starting in the 1970s and gaining momentum in the 1990s and 2000s, waves of rezoning, luxury development, and speculative investment began reshaping formerly affordable working-class neighborhoods. Mount Pleasant was once home to artists and punk musicians. Now it's where tech bros sip $7 lattes in co-working spaces called things like The Nest. Commercial Drive, known for its Italian and Portuguese families, countercultural flair and activism, is now caught between its bohemian spirit and the relentless march of upscale wine bars and wellness boutiques. Meanwhile, Strathcona, Hastings Sunrise, and Chinatown, all rich in immigrant history, have become hotbeds of gentrification disguised as heritage-inspired urban renewal. And let's not forget the downtown east side, a neighborhood that developers once avoided like a gluten-filled donut, now viewed by real estate interests as the final frontier of untapped potential, a phrase that roughly translates to "people live here, but not the kind we want on the brochure." The drivers of this transformation are many. Rezoning policies have made it easier for developers to bulldoze modest homes and replace them with multi-story luxury condos. Foreign and domestic speculation has turned Vancouver's real estate into a game of monopoly, where locals can't even afford Baltic Avenue. And municipal efforts to stimulate urban vibrancy have too often prioritized boutique retail over basic affordability, with the belief that a pop-up donut shop somehow compensates for a 200% rent increase. Let's be honest, there's a difference between revitalization and sterilization. While proponents of gentrification argue that it brings investment, safety, and beautification to neglected areas, critics rightly ask, at what cost and for whom? As new developments rise, so too do the eviction notices. Renovictions and cultural displacements that push out the very communities who made these neighborhoods worth investing in to begin with. What makes gentrification in Vancouver particularly brutal is its branding. Here, developers don't just build condos, they build urban living experiences. A one-bedroom unit smaller than your grandmother's kitchen is now a micro-loft with curated finishes. The same corner store that sold dumplings and soy sauce for 40 years gets replaced by a plant-based medicinal tonic studio. Progress? Maybe. Absurd? Absolutely. So, while the cranes keep climbing and the sidewalks get shinier, it's worth asking whether gentrification is truly improvement or just a real estate makeover with no room left for the original tenants. Because the truth is, gentrification in Vancouver isn't just a trend, it's a transformation with consequences. Alright, let's give credit where credit is due, or at least where it's loudly advertised on developer signage. While gentrification has ruffled more feathers than a rooster at a vegan brunch, its defenders are quick to point out the perks. Urban renewal, they say, is like Botox for the city, tighter, shinier, and supposedly more attractive to investors. And to be fair, Vancouver has seen a surge in infrastructure, business growth, and public amenities as a direct result of revitalized neighborhoods. One of the biggest economic upsides to gentrification is the injection of capital into previously overlooked areas. Areas that were once written off as underdeveloped or blighted now find themselves in the spotlight, attracting tech startups, trendy retailers, and cafes so artisanal they only take payment and emotional vulnerability to tap cards. This wave of investment has not only brought jobs, but also spurred new development in transit, green spaces, and public infrastructure. And let's not forget the fresh coat of paint. Literally, sidewalks are repaved, murals go up, and trash cans get that sleek, stainless steel makeover they've always dreamed of. Then there's the municipal tax base, which has seen a hefty boost thanks to rising property values. That translates into more city revenue, which in theory funds better services for everyone. Of course, in theory, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, but we'll circle back to that in the next section. For now, let's agree that shiny new towers and revitalized main streets have helped put ports of Vancouver on the global map, attracting investors, tourists, and people who think kombucha should cost $9 if it comes in a reusable mason jar. Supporters of gentrification also tout crime reduction and increased safety as benefits. The logic goes, new lighting, more foot traffic, and higher-end businesses lead to safer streets. While this is true in some cases, it's worth noting that the same safety often coincides with increased policing and surveillance, which doesn't always feel safe if you happen to be racialized, low income, or say, breathing while not wearing Lululemons. There's also something to be said about cultural investment. Even if it sometimes feels created within an inch of its life, revitalized neighborhoods often bring public art installations, farmers markets, pop-up galleries, and indie theaters, all of which help create the illusion that this isn't just a real estate play, but a community renaissance. Renaissance being loosely defined as what happens when rent triples and the laundromat becomes a cold brew dispensary. And yes, some residents genuinely benefit. Homeowners in these areas often see their property value skyrocket, unlocking equity they never imagined. For small business owners able to ride the wave, new customers mean higher sales. And for young professionals moving in, these neighborhoods offer the elusive dream. Character with convenience, charm, but with Wi-Fi and avocado toast on every block. So yes, there are undeniable boons to gentrification, economic stimulation, aesthetic transformation, and revitalized infrastructure. But here's the catch. Economic growth isn't neutral. It lifts some up while pushing others down and out. And for every rooftop patio built, there's usually a tenant whose lease didn't get renewed. So before we pop the champagne over revitalized neighborhoods, maybe let's ask, who's being invited to the party and who got invited to make room for it? If the boon of gentrification is economic growth, then the bane is watching that growth roll over communities like a boutique bulldozer. Sure, the sidewalks are shinier and there's finally a place to buy lavender-infused oat milk, but the people who actually built the soul of the neighborhood, they're being priced out, pushed out, or politely erased under the banner of progress. Let's be blunt. Displacement is not a footnote. It's the main plot twist. As neighborhoods are revitalized, long-term tenants and long-time tenants, often low-income, racialized, seniors, or indigenous, are told, in not so many words, that their presence no longer fits the aesthetic. Rents skyrocket, leases go unrenewed, and renovictions, the most Vancouver of eviction styles, cleared the way for condos with names like the Anthology or Canvas, because nothing says fresh start like kicking grandma out of the basement suite so it can be staged as an Airbnb with a Himalayan salt lamp. Cultural erosion comes right behind the rent hikes. Once gutsy neighborhoods with rich immigrant histories, Chinatown, the Punjabi Market, Commercial Drive, get sanitized into Instagrammable shadows of themselves. The mom and pop pho shop gets replaced by a minimalist noodle bar with no prices on the menu. The decades-old Italian bakery shutters to make room for a concept cafe that serves espresso in beakers. And the irony? The very culture that attracted gentrifiers in the first place is the first thing to be bulldozed when the property values climb. Gentrification doesn't just remove people, it whitewashes stories. It flattens community identity into marketable buzzwords. Eclectic, up and coming, historic. Suddenly, being gritty is only cool when it's curated by developers, not when it reflects poverty and systemic neglect. Street art becomes sponsored, murals become branding, and resistance is repackaged into an aesthetic you can rent for $3,500 a month, utilities not included. And let's not forget who bears the brunt. Indigenous residents, new immigrants, and racialized communities face the sharpest edge of gentrification's blade. They're not only displaced physically, but often erased from public memory. Land acknowledgements are made at ribbon cuttings for luxury towers, the same towers built on land that was stolen twice, once for indigenous nations and again from the working class communities who lived there for generations. That's not revitalization, that's colonialism with a granite countertop. Even small business owners, the supposed beneficiaries of revitalized neighborhoods, often can't survive the rent hikes. The result? Streets once full of diversity and difference now serve the same menu: upscale brunch, overpriced plant shops, and artisanal everything. The culture becomes a commodity, and the community becomes a casualty. So yes, the lights are brighter, the coffee stronger, and the sidewalks are Instagram ready, but beneath the surface lies a deeper question. What do we lose when we trade authenticity for affluence? Is a city still vibrant if the people who gave it life can no longer afford to live there? Gentrification doesn't just displace, it edits. And in Vancouver, the eraser has been working overtime. Let's cut through the velvet ropes and organic PR languages. Gentrification isn't just about revitalizing neighborhoods, it's about redistributing space, culture, and opportunity, usually upwards. And like every high stakes game, there are winners sipping rooftop cocktails and losers packing cardboard boxes under eviction notices disguised as upgrade opportunities. So who wins? Developers, landlords, real estate speculators, basically anyone whose net worth comes with an asterisk and a tax shelter. These are the folks who see a working class community and think, yes, the perfect place to build a 36-story tribute to urban lifestyle living. To them, a neighborhood isn't a place where people raise kids or build lives, it's a brand waiting to be monetized. Add a bike lane, name it something vaguely European, and boom, profit. Also winning, municipal coffers. Every rezone lot, every new tower, every sold out live-work loft generates serious property tax revenue. That money, in theory, trickles down into community services. In practice, it's more like, here's your trickle, enjoy the artisanal drinking fountain outside the $4 million condo you can't afford to look at for too long. Local governments get political wins by pointing to economic development, all while avoiding the harder conversations about affordability, displacement, and who actually gets to stay. And let's not forget the new residents, often middle to upper class professionals, remote workers, and creatives who moved into the area because it was edgy, but now file noise complaints about the last remaining community center. They enjoy the perks of cultural diversity without having to experience the systematic barriers that shape these communities in the first place. It's like ordering cultural flavor a la carte without paying the price of the full meal. And who loses? Let's start with the obvious. Low-income tenants, seniors, racialized families, immigrants, the very people who gave these neighborhoods life long before they were trendy. These residents find themselves squeezed out by rising rents, reno evictions, and the relentless march of market forces, which is just capitalism's way of saying, this place isn't for you anymore. They're left with fewer housing options, longer commutes, and fewer connections to the community they once called home. Small businesses lose too. That family-run grocer replaced by a curated, zero-waste concept store. The barbershop with decades of history? Gone. It didn't pair well with the aesthetic of an open concept nail spa that offers intuitive brow shaping. Once rents rise and landlords chase bigger margins, local businesses are priced out and replaced with franchises disguised as indie startups. And then there's the loss that you can't always see, the slow erosion of memory and meaning. When a mural gets painted over, when a building gets demolished, when a long-standing tenant is evicted, a piece of that neighborhood story is erased. What remains may be shinier, wealthier, and better lit, but it's also shallower. Because what made these places vibrant wasn't the architecture, it was the people. So let's not pretend gentrification is a win-win. It's more like a chess match where one side starts with all the pawns missing, and the other side has a bulldozer, a condo blueprint, and a very flexible definition of community engagement. In the end, gentrification asks us, do we want a city do we want a city of polished surfaces or one of lived stories? And depending on where you sit in the boardroom or on the eviction list, the answer looks very different. The role of policy, enabler, or solution. Let's get one thing straight. Gentrification doesn't just happen because a new taco bar opened next to the pawn shop. It happens because someone, somewhere in a boardroom, city hall meeting, or planning department said, yes, let's approve that. Urban change doesn't fall from the sky. It's written in zoning bylaws, backed by tax incentives, and rubber stamped with a smile by policymakers who call it revitalization and hope you don't ask too many questions. In other words, policy is not some innocent bystander. It's the getaway driver. Let's start with zoning laws. The quiet MVPs of gentrification, these little legal puzzles determine what gets built, how tall it can be, and most importantly, who can afford to live in it. Vancouver has historically been addicted to single-family zoning, the kind that preserves leafy, low-density wealth bubbles while allowing hyperdensity in working-class and immigrant neighborhoods under the promise of urban vibrancy. Translation: rich areas stay rich and poor areas get condos called the collective. Then there are the development incentives, which are basically gold stars for developers who promise to sprinkle in a few affordable units. And by affordable, we mean affordable to someone making six figures and still eating instant noodles, ironically. Inclusionary zoning policies are supposed to force developers to provide a certain percentage of below market housing, but enforcement is as loose as a sorry in a Canadian parking lot. Exceptions are granted, fees are waived, and somehow we end up with buildings that are 97% luxury, 2% community theater, and 1% vague promises about community benefit. Meanwhile, rent control, or the lack thereof, has turned Vancouver into the wild west of landlords, where rents can leap higher than a Lululemon-clad jogger the moment a tenant leaves. Renovictions and demovictions are a common tactic. Slap on a coat of paint, rename the unit something with the Latin root, and voila, triple the rent. Policies meant to protect renters exist, but enforcement is so weak you could shout bylaw violation into the void and get a more useful response than from the residential tenancy branch. And let's not forget affordable housing programs, often announced with much fanfare and just enough units to house a single raccoon family. Social housing builds are notoriously slow, underfunded, and then caught in a bureaucratic purgatory. Meanwhile, luxury towers rise faster than the city's medium income drops. But here's the plot twist. Policy doesn't have to be the villain. It could, theoretically, be the hero. Cities like Vienna, Barcelona, and even parts of Montreal have implemented meaningful tenant protections, strong rent controls, and non-profit housing models that prioritize people over profit. Vancouver could do the same if only it had the political will to treat housing as a human right, not a speculative investment strategy with an ocean view. We've seen glimmers of hope, calls for community land trusts, indigenous-led housing on reclaimed territory, and proposals for truly inclusive development. But too often these ideas are pushed aside in favor of the shiny, glass-walled solution that photographs better in developer brochures. So, is policy the enabler or the solution? That depends on who's writing it, who's lobbying behind closed doors, and who's brave enough to say, maybe we don't need another luxury condo called Eclipse. Because in the hands of the powerful, policy builds empires, but in the hands of the people, it could build homes. Now that we've spent several pages dragging gentrification like it just cut the line at an East Van dive bar, you might be asking, is there another way? Good news, yes. Bad news, it requires actual courage, creativity, and for a few people in suits to stop treating housing like a luxury brand drop. Because despite what condo developers and city brochures might have you believe, gentrification isn't inevitable. It's not gravity. It's not a force of nature like rain or overpriced brunch. It's a choice made every day through policies, priorities, and whose voices are being heard and whose are being steamrolled. Let's start with the bold stuff, community land trusts. These are non-profit models where land is held collectively for the public good, not flipped on the speculative market like an NFT of a heritage building. In a land trust, the community controls how the land is developed, ensuring permanently affordable housing, community spaces, and cultural preservation. Translation, you get revitalization without the eviction notices. Imagine that. Next up, cooperative housing. Not just for your retired aunts anymore. Co-ops are a middle finger to the private rental market. Residents run them democratically, and the goal isn't to milk rent for profit, it's to create stable, affordable communities where your rent doesn't depend on your landlord's latest mood swing. Vancouver already has some long-standing co-ops. The problem is, we treat them like endangered species instead of scalable solutions. Then there's Indigenous-led development, which, let's be honest, is what true reconciliation should look like. Projects like the Senaqua development led by the Squamish Nation show what's possible when Indigenous peoples reclaim control of their land and shape urban spaces on their terms. Not only do these projects inject sorely needed housing, but they challenge colonial frameworks and flip the development script. Land back isn't just a slogan, it's a master plan with better ethics and often better architecture too. Another underrated tool, inclusionary zoning with actual teeth. We're talking legally binding requirements for developers to build and maintain affordable units, not the smoke and mirrors version that lets them pay a fee and walk away with a bonus floor of luxury penthouses. And while we're dreaming big, how about rent caps, vacancy taxes that don't come with Swiss cheese loopholes, and funding for local businesses to help them stay rooted as neighborhoods change. Even urban renewal itself could be reimagined. Want new infrastructure, better lighting, cleaner streets? Great, do it with the community, not over their heads. It's called community first planning, and it involves asking people what they want before the bulldozers arrive. What a concept! But maybe the most powerful alternative to gentrification is simply valuing people more than profit. That means measuring success not by how much a neighborhood's property value spikes, but by how many of its residents are still there in 10 years, thriving, connected, and not having to commute from Chilliwack just to afford rent. Because here's the tea. Gentrification tells us we can only have nice things if we clean out the people who've been struggling to make it livable all along. But the truth is, we don't need to erase history to build the future. We just need to get out of the habit of pretending progress only counts when it's wearing skinny jeans and holding a yoga mat. So yes, there are alternatives. They're bold, they're just, they're possible. But they require a city that's brave enough to stop choosing profit over people, and smart enough to realize that preserving community is the most sustainable investment of all. So here we are, standing in front of a luxury condo showroom, wondering if we're actually in a livable city or just extras in a real estate ad for millionaires who've never ridden the bus. Vancouver, with its mountain views and boutique chaos, has reached a crossroads. Do we want a city of people or a city of profits dressed up as urban innovation? Let's be real, gentrification didn't sneak in like a raccoon through the back gate. We opened the door. offered it a mimosa, and gave it a tax break. Every zoning decision, every revitalization plan, every brochure showing a latte, but not the woman evicted to build the cafe. It's all part of a conscious design. And like all designs, it can be redrawn. We're constantly told that Vancouver has to grow, and sure, it does. But growth doesn't have to mean cultural erasure, housing anxiety, and a sea of ghost towers owned by offshore shell companies. Growth could mean building with communities, not bulldozing them. It could mean preserving history instead of power, washing it until it looks like a West Elm showroom. The good news, none of this is inevitable. Gentrification isn't a weather system. It's a set of policy choices, developer priorities, and political decisions that can be challenged, changed, and yes, reversed. We don't have to accept that vibrancy equals dispossession, or that cleaning up a neighborhood means removing the people who live there. We can define progress as preservation. We can invest in communities instead of flipping them like distressed furniture. But that means choosing who we listen to, who we build for, who we're willing to lose or fight to keep. It means holding city officials accountable, demanding real rent control, funding housing co-ops, supporting indigenous land reclamation, and defending the small businesses that don't serve $19 cold-pressed air. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about condos or coffee shops, it's about what kind of a city we want to wake up in. One where everyone has a place, a voice, and a reason to stay, or one where culture is curated, residents are rotated, and the only thing affordable is the illusion of inclusion. So Vancouver, what's it going to be? A city that tells stories, or one that just sells square footage? The cranes are already in the sky. The question is, who gets to stand beneath them without being pushed out of frame? And just like that, the city pulses slows, but the story doesn't stop. You've been watching ISVi, Imran Star Video, where voices come together and the city speaks back. We're a crew, not a single face, a movement, not a moment, and every episode that's built with you, for you, by all of us. From the seawall to the skyline, from underground voices to rooftop hot vibes, we're telling the stories that don't make the news, but make the neighborhood. If this episode hit, pass it on, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on TikTok and Instagram, drop a comment, leave a like, and tell us what your Vancouver sounds like. We're building this together, clip by clip, story by story. So, from 100 to 10,000 subscribers to wherever this takes us, when we get there, we all show up. So, until the next drop, stay loud, stay collective, and stay in it. This is ISVi, signing off.